Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time today to meet with us. Good morning. My name is Kyle Boroman. I'm a biologist with Ducks Unlimited Canada, and I'm going to be your host for the next little while this morning as we talk about European water chestnut and water soldier. So I'm joining you from my home office here in the city of Kingston, which is located on the beautiful shores of Lake Ontario at the mouth of the Cataraqui and St. Lawrence rivers. I know that we do have participants from all across the province tuning in today, and I thank you each for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I'd like to begin today's presentation by acknowledging that the city of Kingston is on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat people, and we thank these nations for their care and stewardship over this shared land. While the pandemic unfortunately limits our ability to hold in-person events, we recognize the importance of continuing to engage the community in our efforts to combat invasive species that threaten Ontario's shorelines and wetland habitats. So before we begin, we do just have a couple of housekeeping items. I'm just making sure the screen's good there. Okay, so we do have some housekeeping items before we begin. And the program this morning will take us till approximately 11:30 a.m. And we'll do our best to keep things moving and stay within our set time frame. This includes time to answer questions throughout the webinar. So typically we are hosting these in person, and in that case, we don't have to worry about background noise. But in today's discussion since it's on Zoom, we're going to be muting all of the microphones for everyone except for the event speakers. And so that's really just so that background noise in your house isn't projected for everyone in their own homes as well. We're gonna get started here. And Sean, I think we're gonna switch to my screen here. I do have some staff that are helping us out here on the back end. So we've got Sean Conway out of our national office with Ducks Unlimited, who's helping with the slides, as well as Joanne Barbaza, who is our manager of communications here in Ontario. So as I'm kind of bumbling through here, let me just get things up and running. I was talking about how we've muted everyone. Since you are muted, we do ask that you can submit your questions and comments using the meeting's chat window. And so whether you're on a PC or a mobile device, the controls to open and close the chat are at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many of the questions as we can within the time that we have. So feel free to put up any questions that you have as we're going along. And also just want to let everyone know that we are going to be recording today's event so that we can share it with folks who are unable to join today. As mentioned before, we're going to be taking the time to discuss two invasive aquatic plants that we have in the province here, and they are designated as prohibited species in Ontario. And these are European water chestnut and water soldier. As well, what we're going to do is introduce new provincial prevention and response plans that enable people to control these plants without the need to get an authorization under the Provincial Invasive Species Act. We'll also provide a little bit of background about how these plants grow and the best techniques to control them. So there's going to be two main speakers today, myself and Rob McGowan. And so Rob has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the aquatic plant management world. And he'll be covering everything water soldier, life history, and control related. And I will be discussing European water chestnut, as well as provide an overview of the new prevention and response plans for these species. We'll have a couple of opportunities, as mentioned before, to answer some questions. And so what we'll do, we're going to break this up. So right after we go through the life history of the plants and how to ID and their habitat, things like that, we'll have a question period there. Then we'll walk through the prevention and response plans, provide you with some best practices and some techniques and tips to control water soldier and water chestnut within these prevention and response plans, and follow up with any last minute questions that you might have. So before we dive in, I'm pleased to welcome Francine McDonald. Francine is a senior invasive species biologist for the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry within the Biodiversity and Invasive Species section. So she's here to tell us a few words.
Thanks, Kyle. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, I want to welcome everyone to this session organized by Ducks Unlimited Canada and the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, to learn more about these very serious aquatic invasive plants. These two plants, just a little bit of background just to start, they are actually identified on the Great Lakes Governor's and Premier's least wanted list of aquatic invasive species. So they are recognized as a very high risk threat across the Great Lakes Basin. Unfortunately, Canada and Ontario are these are some of the few places in Ontario where these species are found in the basin. So it really highlights the importance of prevention and management. MNRF has regulated water soldier and European water chestnut as prohibited species under the Invasive Species Act because they pose such a high risk to our biodiversity and the uses of our waterways. And we have developed prevention and response plans, as Kyle mentioned. And these are intended to help guide management to enable shoreline property owners and other groups to control it without an authorization under the Species Act. Ducks Unlimited and OFAH have been real leaders in managing these species in the province. Our ministry has worked very closely with these two organizations in our efforts to eradicate them from the province. And, Kyle and Rob have a wealth of experience in terms of management. So I'm really pleased that both these gentlemen have offered to share their experience with everyone today with management, as well as to walk us all through the prevention response plans. So without any further ado, Kyle and Rob, I'm going to leave it to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Francine.
Thanks, Francine.
So I guess I'll take this opportunity. We're going to jump, so you don't have to listen to my voice for the next 45 minutes, and we'll jump in and let Rob take over. And so for the past 7 years, Rob has worked as the management technician for the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, where he is the lead for monitoring, surveillance, control, and all things water soldier with the populations within the Trent Severn Waterway, as well as controlling, populations that pop up in private ponds across Ontario. And I'm going to pass this over to Rob. He also has, I believe, 15 plus years of experience working in the environmental field with the MNRF, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as Credit Valley Conservation, and is a graduate of Fleming College and Trent University.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me. So today we're just going to start off with some basic life history of what water soldier is and why is it a problem in Ontario. So water soldier is an invasive aquatic plant that is native to Europe and Northwest Asia. The first known wild population in North America was found in the Trent River in 2008 near the Hamlet Trent River. Water soldier was used as an ornamental plant in water gardens, which is the likely source of its introduction to the Trent River. Why is it a problem? Well, water soldier forms dense mats of floating and submerged vegetation. It crowds out native vegetation, resulting in decreased biodiversity. It has the potential to alter surrounding water chemistry, which may harm phytoplankton and other aquatic organisms. Dense floating mats of water soldier can hinder recreational activities such as boating, angling, and swimming. And the sharp serrated leaf margins can cut swimmers and individuals who handle the plant. So caution is required whenever handling the plants. Habitat, where does water soldier like to live? The typical habitat of water soldier is still or slow flowing mesoeutrophic water. It is not found in very shallow water, fast moving water, or in areas where water fluctuates due to the sinking and floating behavior of the plant. The plant is lightly rooted and prefers soft muddy sediments. Under conditions of low light, the leaves do not develop enough gas in their air canals and intercellular spaces to become emergent, and it is normal to find water soldier as a bottom dwelling plant and water from 1 to 5 meters deep. So what does it look like? So water soldier appears as two different forms, the submergent and emergent form. The submergent form overgrows the bottom of the littoral zone and has long, bright green, brittle, spirally twisted mature leaves that have a serrated margin of sharp spines. And you can see that in the picture on the right, the serrations on the margin of the leaf. The emergent form breaches the water surface and has stiff erect leaves with serrated spines on the margin. Both forms of water soldier produce turions and offset, which are their main reproduction organs. In late spring, rosettes form roots that grow into the sediment loosely, anchoring the plant. At the same time, offsets and turions start to form. The rosette leaves can grow up to 60 centimeters in length. The water soldier is bright green in color. It's almost iridescent in the water. There's no other native plant that kind of is as bright green as water soldier, so it's very recognizable by its color. The leaves are sword-shaped, rigid, brittle, and have serrated margin of spines. Flowering, which isn't very common in Ontario, but when it does happen, the flowers are white with 3 petals. And water soldier is an asexual reproduction by the way of offsets and turions. So those is the main reproduction is the offset and turions, and it doesn't have any seed production and really doesn't have any viable seed. So on to reproduction. So water soldier relies primarily on the vegetative reproduction through offsets and turions. The offsets develop directly into open rosettes, resembling small versions of the parent plant, and become detached by late summer. Offsets that develop late in the growing season are almost bud-like and called turions. Turions will remain attached to the mother plant until a following spring when they detach. So sexual reproduction is very rare, even in its native range in Europe and Asia. Water soldier's main means of reproduction are the offsets and turions, and it's a very successful reproduction strategy. Mature water soldier plants produce offsets, which are similar to those produced by the household spider plant. Offsets look similar to the version of an adult plant, and this is their main primary method of reproduction. So water soldier was first reported in the Trent Severn Waterway in 2008. This was the first report in the wild in North America. Water soldier has since traveled downstream 50 kilometers, and it's presently found below Loch 7 and approximately 20 kilometers from Lake Ontario's Bay of Quinte. There was a second report in the wild in 2015 in the Black River in Sutton, Ontario, which is a tributary to Lake Simcoe. And rapid response efforts by Aurora District MNRF and OFAH were successful, and water soldier has not been observed in the Black River since 2016, but we continue to monitor each year. And if 2020 wasn't bad enough, a new population of water soldier was reported in Red Horse Lake, which is north of Gananoque, and is part of the Gananoque Upper Watershed River System. And we responded with rapid response to that in September. So hopefully we won't be seeing that plant anymore. So just to put things into perspective, Kyle, if you go to the next slide, please. This is a timeline series from a landowner who has access to Lake Seymour, which is part of the Trent Severn Waterway. And she just captured this timeline of photos that will show you why water soldier is such a problem and how fast it can get out of control. So this is the summer of 2013, and you can see some scattered water soldier plants in the near shore area here and in the littoral zone. And if you take a look to the next slide, in 2014, you can see that the water soldier has completely taken over the near shore area and is starting to move out further into the lake and the bay. So this is one growing season. So if we switch to the next slide, which is the spring 2015, you can see that the landowner has now had to change her perspective from the shoreline to the end of her dock. And so that's how far it's spread out. And if we take, so note this is spring 2015. Next slide, 2015, August 2015, they are completely bogged in from water soldier. This poor guy's probably not going to get his boat out anytime soon. So this is why it's such a problem and how fast it can become a larger problem.
Great, thanks, Rob. So that gives us a little bit of a background of what water soldier looks like, how to idea it, and some of the issues that come with the plant. if you do have any questions, throw them up in the chat, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the same thing, but about European water chestnut now, and then we can answer any questions that you have about the plants after this next section. So European water chestnut, just go back to the slide I had here. This is a population that we had worked with Ducks Unlimited Canada. This was back in 2017. This is a population that we had out in the Cataraqui River. And at the time when I was new to the position, working for Ducks Unlimited as the coordinator for the European Water Chestnut Program, this was the biggest population that I had seen at the time. 3 years prior, the amount of, the plants can grow very quickly and take over an area relatively fast, sort of like water soldier, but in different ways. And so this was really the biggest one that I've seen. And since then, we've been pretty successful with the program, and just over persistence, and we'll get through that with the control and everything to give you an idea of how it can look when it gets really heavy up on the surface. So European water chestnut, it is an annual floating leafed aquatic plant, and it's native to Eurasia and Africa. So annual meaning that it grows from seed every year, reproduces new seeds, and then it dies at the end of the year. So you have a new plant that grows the next season. So it was first introduced back in the late 1800s because of its unique look and its growth habit. It's a really interesting looking plant. And so it was really just an ornamental species that, after a series of accidental and intentional releases into the wild, had slowly worked its way throughout the Northeast United States. So if you see here in the map, I've got the areas where it's the highest presence of the plant. And it kind of worked its way most notably through the Hudson River system and watershed, and then across the Erie Canal as well, throughout New York, and has since spread through 12 different states. It's only found in a handful of locations in Ontario and in Quebec. And its distribution within Ontario consists of these small isolated populations in comparison to what we see in the US. It was first observed in the Ottawa River back in 2006 in Voyageur Provincial Park, and has been managed by Ontario Parks since the discovery at that site. More recently, water chestnut has been discovered in the Kingston and Frontenac Islands area in 2011. And then in the Rideau River, just upstream of the Black Rapids Dam, kind of adjacent to where the Ottawa Airport is within the Rideau River. And these two locations in the Kingston area and the Black Rapids Dam are two locations that were the main focus for the European water chestnut that Ducks Unlimited oversees. So a little bit about the habitat. These plants thrive in nutrient-rich waters, slow-moving waters. Typically, these are wetlands and back bays, anywhere where the plants can kind of find a spot and settle. They enjoy soft substrate and do best in full sun. And the optimal water depth, they can grow between 30 centimeters and 3 meters in depth. Water clarity is sometimes a limit on that deep end, because every plant needs light, nutrients, and water, I guess, and they have no shortage of water. So optimally they grow in about 2 meters of depth. And so once the plants start to germinate, once the water hits about 12 degrees in the year. So why is it a problem? So I showed you that one picture at the beginning of that massive patch of water chestnut that we have in the Kingston area, and it pales in comparison to some of the issues that they have in the US. And so luckily we don't have quite the establishment that they have of the plants. They can quickly form dense floating mats capable of intercepting about 95% of the sunlight that would go through the water, the water column, to reach the plants underneath. So really what they do is they're very effective at growing really quickly to the surface, blanketing the surface, and then blocking out light and nutrients to other species. So another thing, when these dense mats of plants start to decay and die off, they can lower the amount of dissolved oxygen levels that are available in the water, which can reduce the amount that's available to fish and cause fish kills. They can negatively impact waterfowl habitat, fish habitat, and other wildlife. And they can impact our navigation and recreational use of the waterways. As you can see, the top picture there on the top right is the Erie Canal. So this is a major navigational waterway that is pretty choked out. And then the seeds themselves. So the seeds are heavy when they're full, and I guess they have their fruit. Once the plants grow up in the season, the seed husk becomes empty and it can float on the surface and then wash up on shore. So they can be pretty hazardous to step on. And at times they can be, pretty painful when you grab onto some of the chestnuts as you're doing some control. You just have to make sure not to either wear gloves or just be very careful. So what does this plant look like? It's really neat, I think. I'm a bit of an aquatic plant nerd. I know Rob is as well, and we get excited about these things. But it's interesting. It has two completely different types of leaves. So it does have these floating leaves that are diamond shaped. They look unlike anything that we have in our water here in Ontario. Maybe if you had like a large tooth aspen fall in the water, you might think, some of those leaves are water chestnut, but they grow kind of within the lilies, but they look unlike any of the lilies that we have. These diamond shaped toothed leaves are connected to the plant at the surface. These floating leaf plants are part of a rosette. So meaning that all the leaves come from a single location. And so you see these circles where they work out, the diamonds kind of face out from the center of the plant. These leaves are attached by a spongy petiole or leaf stem. And if you look at the bottom right picture, there is a good picture of the leaf stem there. It's got a little float, and that's what helps them stay on the surface of the water. So if the waves are kind of moving up and down, they stay right on the surface of the water and able to make that blanket that sits on the surface. The submersed leaves, which is interesting too, you've got a rosette of leaves, and then you have oppositely whorled leaves around the stem. So these are the submersed leaves under the water. They're feather-like, and they kind of act like adventitious roots. So they're able to pull some nutrients from the water. Where those leaves are as well, if those nodes, if the plant ends up in shallower water, they can send out roots from where those leaf nodes are underwater as well, and reestablish themselves in a new place if they get dislodged. The flowers are pretty small. They're 4 white petals. They're about 8 millimeters long, and they're born right out of the axils of the floating leaves. So right at the base of the rosette is kind of where you see them, and those produce space for the fruit, which is they have a hard woody seed and fleshy green endocarp on the outside. And so once these plants start to mature, you see in the bottom right, they go from green to almost like a reddish brown. And it's kind of, like watching an apple on a tree getting ready to be eaten. It's kind of the same thing where you kind of see these visual cues and we know when those seeds are going to drop off the plant. So as mentioned before, those seeds are the only way that they reproduce from year to year. So they put a lot of effort into making these big viable seeds, and they're about the size of a squash ball. And they, what they can do is settle down in the sediments and create a very dense seed bank, and they can be viable for up to 10 years. So management over time is important. And so, as mentioned previously, they are annual plants. It's kind of a recurring theme I'm going to come back to, but meaning they grow from seed every year and reach maturity to produce offspring, and then they die off. So every year, growth every year is really dependent on creating that seed bank. And, they're going to be investing in that seed bank for the rest of their time. And, it's up to us to keep making withdrawals so that eventually there's no seeds left in that seed bank, and then that population is gone. So really, we just continue to manage these plants. So really how it works as the water temperature is warm in the early summer, water chestnut will start to germinate and send single tiny rosettes up to the surface. They look exactly like the big ones, but they're just smaller, about 4 centimeters in size. And at that time, the seed actually works as an anchor to hold the plant in place until the roots can grow out of the seed or out of the plant and establish. once that happens, the seed hull will take off and then it can show up on the beaches. As these tiny rosettes are reaching the surface, they're able to photosynthesize. Then you start to have these additional rosettes that branch off and then will reach the surface. And the plant is capable of having, up to a dozen rosettes, and each one of those rosettes can have about a dozen seeds. So, about 150 seeds that you're going to get per each plant is possible. And they can really, really dig in where they are. So by late summer, they've reached their peak biomass depending on how much space they have to grow. And the seeds start to break off. And by the end of September, the plants are starting to die back and senesce. So really from a control perspective, we looked at doing this earlier in the season before those seeds are ready and mature. So with that, we're going to step in if there's any questions that people have. The chat looks pretty quiet other than thank you for the dinner jacket comment, Mike. That's great. I do like to wear my best my best look. I figured, biologists, you can get away with flannel and when you look like you're in a wetland. So it looks like we don't have any questions at the time being, so maybe we'll just jump right into the prevention and response plans. And here we go. So we talked a little bit about these plants. Now over this next section, we'll provide a bit more detail about the provincial prevention and response plans that have been developed for these species. So water soldier and European water chestnut are two invasive aquatic plants that have been listed as prohibited species under the Act, Invasive Species Act, as Francine mentioned at the beginning. So under this, and I'm likely reiterating, but it's illegal to import, possess, transport, release, breed, grow, buy, sell, lease, trade, any of these things with these prohibited invasive species. So really the act is in place to stop these plants from getting spread in our waterways. These two species and the others, so we have Brazilian alodia, hydrilla, and parrot feather that are also on the list, have all been kind of desirable aquarium or water garden plants, over the last 50 to 100 years in one way or another. And so really that trade has been kind of, prevents that or provides that potential for introduction and spread of these species. So the act helps kind of on the front end to stop any import or trade or sale of these plants in say water garden stores and nurseries, things like that. However, for the case of water soldier and water chestnut, it's quite interesting because the plants are already present in our waterways and they're already established in a few locations. So since control techniques such as hand removing consists of possessing, and then once you have the plants, you have to take them somewhere. So you're transporting and then you're going to dispose of them. You're releasing the plants. Prior to these plans, you're actually in contravention of the act if you do this, unless you have an authorization from the MNRF to do so. So in Robin, my example, as we're running our programs with water chestnut and water soldier, we had to get authorization from the MNRF to handle these plants, and they come with conditions that we have to follow as well. So really, these new prevention and response plans lay out provisions and guidelines of who can do this, do control, who can perform control with these species, and who can do so without the need with an authorization under the act. So really to set out the guidelines and rules so that you don't have to go to the MNRF for a permit, an authorization to do so, as long as you're following the guidelines of this and any other legislation that's involved, and I'll cover that at the end. So the prevention and response plans, what are they? The purpose of these plans is to authorize certain activities that would be otherwise prohibited, as we've mentioned, in order to monitor, limit the spread, manage the control, and eradicate these plants. So really that possession, transportation, and disposal. So being able to do these things on behalf of the greater good of controlling these species. So it does identify the persons and groups that are able to do so, and identifies the activities and conditions that you can, in order to possess and transport and deposit these species. So I'm going to take a bit of time on this slide and who's eligible. So first off, we within the prevention and response plan, there's 5 main categories of persons or groups that are eligible to work with these plants under the prevention and response plan. These include specific entities and groups, waterfront property owners that have a pond and water garden, hydroelectric dam operators, as well as contractors, or I guess agents or employees. So the first one, so entities that can engage in the prevention and monitoring, control and removal of these plants would consist of a band, a tribal council, an organization that represents a territorial-based Aboriginal community. So any one of the 3 there. A non-for-profit corporation, so something like Ducks Unlimited Canada or the OFAH, a municipality, or a conservation authority. So within these different groups, these include any of the individuals or any volunteers that are working with these groups and acting under the supervision and control of the groups or entities. The next group, which I'm sure there's a few of you in the group here today, would be waterfront property owners that can engage in the control and removal. And they're able to do so if their property has a boundary on a lake, river, stream, or pond, and where that control and removal is going to be carried out. So this also extends to property owners who are separated from a lake, stream, or pond, or river, where there's a road allowance or a strip of public land not more than 30 meters wide. So, if you're kind of adjacent to the water and meet that, you can still do this control. The next group consists of property owners with a pond or water garden that lies wholly within the boundaries of their property. And so Rob had kind of mentioned earlier, Rob has done some control work in isolated ponds where it would be, an introduced population because it was available as an ornamental plant years ago. And dealing with these within an isolated system like a pond or a water garden that lies within your boundary, you're able to do this as well. The next group would be operators of hydroelectric dams and other in-water structures engaged in activities to control, manage European water chestnut or water soldier as part of facility maintenance or construction activities. I'm not quite sure if it extends to beavers at all, but they do some dam work, but maybe not hydroelectric. But they could also be considered agents or employees, I guess. They could be a contractor. So really that last point is anybody who's working for the groups above, if they're working on behalf, so if it's say a contractor who is doing the removal for you, or say employees working on behalf of one of the organizations or the groups above are also eligible to work under these plans. So authorized activities. So the prevention and response plans lay out these authorization activities that are needed in order to complete the work in terms of control and disposal. And so really it comes down to, when you're removing water chestnut or water soldier, the authorized activities that allows you to possess and transport the plants if you're doing the control work. And then secondly, to deposit the plants at a location. So that would be disposing of the plants or plant parts from the body of water where they're removed. So up until now, DU and OFAH have been able to perform all of this work under with an authorization under the Act. So, say we were to start the work now with the prevention and response plan, since we are a non-for-profit, we wouldn't need to get that authorization to, continue with certain methods of control. So as mentioned, these different activities that we can do come with conditions, and the conditions here are similar actually for both species. So I've just, they are 2 different prevention and response plans. So there is some, some subtle differences between the 2, but for the most part, they're very similar. And so with that in mind, the conditions for both are actually here. And so the following conditions apply to all persons carrying out the activities. no person acting under the authority of this prevention and response plan shall remove the plants other than by hand pulling or human powered devices. So this means that, you know, you're physically hand pulling the plants. For water chestnut, that's something that we do quite a bit, or using, say, something human powered like a rake. Something like in, you know, there's lake associations and private cottage owners, things like that, that have, say, a cutter bar or have like a mechanical harvester that they're able to cut larger swaths of plants. And those are not covered as acts of ways that you can control the plant with these prevention and response plans. So, and there's some reasons for that, and it really has to do, you know, with the biology of the plant to ensure that we're not creating a bigger issue by, you know, releasing plants and you know, maybe having a bit more of a messy issue on our hands. But so just to reiterate, so it's all hand or human powered. Those cutter bars and things like that, if you were to use them, you would have to contact the MNRF to get a permit to do so ahead of time. So reasonable precautions that must be taken. Reasonable precautions also have to be taken to make sure that you're not depositing the plants downstream. So in Rob's case with water soldier, those turions and the, you know, those little offsets of the plants, things like that, like these floating plant parts can kind of take off while you're doing management. You want to make sure that you're not, they're not spreading downstream as you're doing the control work, so everything stays contained. And so the third point here, all equipment and watercraft that's used in the infested waters during, you know, the work that you're doing for prevention, monitoring, control, and removal need to be inspected and cleaned of any plants or plant parts before moving the watercraft over land. So really clean, drain, dry your boat and watercraft. And then lastly, we got, halfway through. If transported over land, if the plants are transported over land, you need to have them contained so that they're not going to be, you know, flying out over an overpass and introducing into a new waterway, and just making sure that they're not able to make their way back to the water or really anywhere. We don't want an accidental release from our good work of trying to control them. And plants removed from the water must be disposed of on land in ways that ensure that no plant or plant part will end up back in the waterway. What's really interesting about aquatic plants, a lot of them, if you completely dry them out in the sun, they're completely dead. Like if they're completely desiccated and they're not able to grow back. However, that said, things like water soldier and water chestnut, because they're so big, they can live outside of the water for a while because they can hold moisture. So you want to find a place that you can completely dry them out. And so I've had plants a few times where, you know, you'd have them in a big pile. You could dig away at the top of the pile, pull a plant from the middle, and it could potentially, you know, if I was to re-release it, it could potentially still live. It still has that green fleshy, you know, some green flesh to it. So just be sure that you're going to dispose of it in a place where it's not going to get reintroduced and it's able to completely dry out if you can. And then lastly, entities and persons will notify the ministry prior to doing any of the work. So I've got here an email address. The notification is to be made by email to invasive.species@ontario.ca. I believe Joanne's going to be posting that in the chat. If not now, then later on in the thing. But all of this information is right from the prevention and response plans, and they're available through the Ontario government websites as well. And we're going to provide links of where to find that. So if you're on a computer looking at the plans, you can actually click on the links within the plan to get to these different sections. So with all that said, I'm going to pass it back over to Rob, and he's going to talk a little bit about controlling water soldier.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Sets me up really well for kind of the control options that are laid out for water soldier. The control options for water soldier under the PRP, we have two options. One is hand pulling and the other is a herbicide application. So for hand pulling or manual removal, individual water soldier plants and small populations less than 25 meters squared can be controlled by hand, pulling by hand, or with the use of human-powered handheld devices such as a rake that Kyle was mentioning. Hand pulling is advised only for plants that are easily accessible and if the entire patch can be removed. So you don't want to start removing a patch and stopping because you have the potential of you've already disturbed that patch, and now that could potentially, those plants could spread further from there because you've disturbed the area. Pulling the plants will disturb the sediment and reduce the visibility in the water. So repeated removal attempts after the water clears is going to be required to ensure that all the water soldier plants are removed. And a pro tip is wearing gloves when you're removing water soldier, because those sharp serrated spines aren't a joke. I've learned the hard way sometimes, and usually I even wear long sleeves as well, because some of these plants can be up to 2 feet long, and when you're manhandling them, they manhandle you back sometimes. So that's my little pro tip for the day. The best time of year for hand pulling or using a human powered device is in the early summer, so about mid-July to August. And this is before the water soldier starts to produce its turions for the next season. So, and if you're managing hand pulling after that, they can be released. And then really what you're doing is you're spreading your problem over to the next year, because those turions will drop and they'll grow into a new adult plant. And next summer, you'll be managing those plants again. We try to avoid hand pulling or using human powered devices in the late summer and the fall to prevent the dispersal of these propagals. So if work is planned to occur when in-water work is restricted as per Ontario's in-water work timing guidelines, you must contact either the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry or Parks Canada or the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, whatever agency is responsible for the management of the waters at the site you're applying for the authorization at. So that's hand pulling. So the other option for control under the PRP is herbicide application. So within Canada, dicot, trade name Reward, it's an aquatic herbicide, is the only herbicide currently registered by Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency for control of water soldier and aquatic systems. You can consult the PMRA pesticide label search online for more information about pesticide products that are registered for use in Canada. Dicot can provide control of medium to large infestations of water soldier. It is a non-selective contact herbicide, and its use is best timed in the fall, so from about September to mid-October. This is when the water soldier is actively growing. This timing will reduce impacts on our native aquatic plants, which have gone dormant by the fall. Herbicide treatments in the fall can also impact reproductive propagals, such as those turions and offsets we were speaking of, because they remain on the plant over winter for the next season. So if we hit them with herbicide in the fall, they'll be affected just like the main plant would be. The efficacy of dicot can be affected by temperature, turbidity, water flow, and the depth of water. So it's important to have those timing windows in the fall and make sure you're not going beyond that, like that mid-October, because the temperature threshold for water soldier is about 10 degrees Celsius, or sorry, for Reward is 10 degrees Celsius. Additional control efforts in future years may be necessary after the use of herbicide. So even if you did have a herbicide application in the fall, if you come next spring, you got a few scattered plants, that's when you can start to implement those hand pulling options or using a rake, and it can just start to clean up the little plants that are left over. So if work is planned to occur when in-water work is restricted as per Ontario's in-water work timing guidelines, you must contact the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, Parks Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, whoever is responsible for the management of that water, and apply for an authorization. If you plan to use herbicide to control water soldier or other aquatic plants, approval is required from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Information on requirements for aquatic herbicide applications can be obtained by contacting your local MECP regional office, and you can discuss plans and what pesticide permits may be required. Using an integrated management approach is a good way to approach things. So usually when you have a population of water soldier, you're either going to have a large population or you're going to have some scattered populations. So a management approach that includes both hand pulling and herbicide applications will be the most effective and you'll be the most successful in eradicating the water soldier. So the benefits of hand pulling is that you can save a lot of money and do it yourself within reason. If you have a small population, you can clear them from your waterfront. But if you have a large population, as I was speaking before, you could get a herbicide treatment. And then in the next following year, you can start cleaning up those water soldier plants that may be left over or that were missed in the herbicide application in the fall. One thing to do is consider the size of the infestation. You can see this gentleman in the boat. It looks pretty exhausted to me with a heaping full boat of water soldier. It's not an easy task to take on. Large populations of water soldier, it takes a lot of work. So target control should be based on the size of population and time of the year. So again, following the Ontario in-work and timing guidelines. So hand pulling should be done from about July to August for individual plants that are less, population size are less than 25 meters squared. So even at 25 meters squared, that's a pretty big population. You would be, you're going to be putting a full day in with a population that size. And again, considering a herbicide application greater than 25 meters squared is recommended for those plants. And the size population, when you see individual plants or floating plants, they can be removed readily at any point in time because they can be a source of a new population in the future. When we come to this, we're talking about controlling. The easiest way to control something is preventing the spread. And it's really cheap to do. So preventing the spread during control, because it's important because water current, wave, and wind action can dislodge plants and seeds and carry them to new areas. So even though you may have solved your problem in front of your shoreline, your neighbor may not be all that happy if it's we're not trying to prevent that spread even within the water body that the plant is already present. So we should take precautions to prevent the release of the plants downstream during control. Depending on the location and situation, I know when I do it, I use floating barriers or temporary enclosures, as you see in the picture in the top middle. That's just a seine net that I grab from work and put it around the population. And then I can ensure that there's not going to be any plants floating away. And I can let all that turbidity fall out from the water column, and I can get my visibility back without worrying about rogue plants floating downstream. And clean draining and drying. Cleaning all your equipment and your boat and all your related equipment before and after, or sorry, after you remove the plants is a good practice. So what you're looking for is any mud, vegetation, mussels, or any other suspicious debris you see on your vessel or any of your equipment. Draining all the standing water from your boat by pulling the transom plug, draining the live well, lowering the motor, and draining all other water in the vessel is important because these turions and seeds and offsets can survive in that water that might be left in the bottom of your boat. So draining all the water out is very important too. Drying or disinfecting your boat and equipment is a good way to do things. Are we okay, Kyle?
Yeah, I guess the scroll button will move things if I don't have it in the right spot. So
Okay,
I apologize.
we're on the clean, drain, dry slide right now. Perfect, thank you, sir. So some aquatic species can survive up to 2 weeks out of water, as Kyle's was mentioning. So and not every invader can be seen. Right here, we're dealing with these plants, but there are other invasive species that can hitchhike. So we want to remove all these species from our boat. So we can do that by leaving your boat outside in direct sunlight for 5 days, or we can clean your boat with 50 degrees Celsius hot water, or with a power washer with 2,500 to 3,000 PSI, which most power washers will do now. And as Kyle was mentioning, the disposal of water soldier and European water chestnut is it's important to take proper steps. You can see in the picture in the left, Kyle was talking about those plants staying alive. We removed these plants via mechanical harvester, which I think Mark Lee asked a question in the comments there previous that we'll get to in a little bit. We used a mechanical harvester to remove all this water soldier, and we had to go back and spread these plants out because a few days later, we went to see how they were decaying, and there were still live plants. There were still viable plants at the bottom of the pile because they retain so much water. So it's important to dispose all of your water soldier and European water chestnut at least 30 meters away from any water body to prevent them from re-entering that water body. And while transporting them, making sure that they're secure so they're not entering a new water body. So just to reiterate the best practices for controlling water soldier, using integrated management approach that includes both hand pulling and aquatic herbicide is most effective. Target control based on the size of the population and time of year. So following those in-water work timing windows, hand pulling from July to August for plants that are less than 25 meters squared, herbicide applications between September and October for the larger populations that are larger than 25 meters squared, and just getting those individual plants out of the water as fast as you can when you see them floating by, and prevent the spread during controls. So we know that we need to take precautions to prevent the release of the plants downstream while we're controlling, and cleaning our equipment and watercraft. So making sure that we've cleaned all our equipment and our watercraft, so we're not going to be spreading them further after we've cleaned up the water soldier in front of our area, and dispose of the water soldier carefully. So at least 30 meters away from any water body. And again, handle the water soldier plants with care. I highly recommend gloves and possibly long sleeves.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Rob, for going through all of that stuff. And so we're going to transition to controlling European water chestnut. There's a lot of overlap between the two in terms of, the things to look out for to make sure that you're not releasing plants downstream, you're collecting everything. I mentioned earlier that water chestnut only grows from seed, but one thing to keep in mind is that you have these floating leaves that sit on the surface and they stay green. If you cut the stems, those floating rosettes can, move around. They can the wind will take them wherever they go. And that's kind of how they can locally relocate themselves within a waterway into those back bays and things and get a new population established. So while you don't have new plants growing from, vegetative, parts like an offset like you would with water soldier from year to year, within the year you could have broken rosettes of plants or stems moving and starting a new population somewhere else because they're able to reroot or continue for those floating plants be able to continue growing seeds from all that sunlight that they're getting. So here's just before we get really into it, we're going to talk mostly, it's really hand pulling is what we're going to get into. And this picture here is from 2015 in the Black Rapids, in the Rideau River near the Black Rapids population. And you can see just how much plant material they have here. This is actually our director for Eastern Director for Ducks Unlimited and his family working away on the population. And so really, like I mentioned before, and I'm going to mention another 1,000 times, they grow from seeds. So we want to stop them from dropping new seeds. So year after year, we had gone back to this location and removed the plants while they're big like this before they can drop new seeds. So we're really just using up whatever seeds are left in the sediment. By 2019, we were out and we only picked up 7 little bins of the plants from all of our efforts. And so really, like, we do see these dramatic declines if you're persistent with water chestnut to remove them. One other thing to mention, under the new provincial prevention and response plans, I wouldn't consider this the best way to transport water chestnut because you have the potential to, drop it back into the waterway. So really, like, we've changed the methods. We use bins now and things like that. This is right beside where we were taking the plants out of the water and stuff like that. So it wasn't that big of an issue, but you really want to make sure that you're not depositing any of the plants back into the waterway or allowing them to escape. So as mentioned before, in Ontario, I've had a pretty lucky go with this position because all the heavy lifting they did in the first few years, all the heavy pulling, by the time I came in, those were the biggest populations that we saw. So I haven't had to do as much pulling. It's really taking care of these smaller populations. But with that said, in Ontario, we do have different methods you can use. You can hand pull. You could Voyageur Provincial Park uses a harvester, and herbicide is used pretty heavily throughout the US. But for the most part, our populations in Ontario, we haven't allowed them to get out of hand like they have in the US. So it's really maintaining these small populations, and it's really our ideal method for the most effective method we have, and the preferred method for Ducks Unlimited is to hand pull the plants. And it's because they're really relatively easy to remove in one piece. They're big, they're kind of loosely rooted, to be honest. And so, it does take a little bit of skill, and some time, but what you do is you gently grab the plant at the base of the rosette. And you can see here in the picture, I've got one held at the base, and then I'm just slowly wiggling the plant back and forth and pulling them up by the roots. You can feel those roots kind of released from the water, and they're not very big roots in comparison to the size of the plant. And you're able to pull the entire plant from the water. And it's just, you move slowly. It's, a very relaxing morning typically, because you want to get out there when there's not a lot of wind action, things like that. So you're going to take those, you're going to reduce potential of breaking the plants. If you break the stems, they can grow new rosettes. So you want to remove all that plant material, or else, and you want to make sure you go back and back and back over the year to make sure that there's been no new growth. So I just have a comment here about herbicide as well. And like Rob said, diquat is the only one that's available where these species are on the label to use. It is ideal for large, dense populations. It is not covered under the prevention and response plans. So you would have to go through, getting authorization from the MECP, Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, for herbicide use, as well as some other steps with that. So I'm not going to cover herbicide because there's really no reason to use it in Ontario at this point. For any of the control that we're aware of, it's really at kind of this effective hand harvesting level for any new groups that are working with it. So really, as an annual, again, water chestnut puts a lot of its effort into producing those large viable seeds. And so, that's how they establish those populations, is just get a bunch of seeds in one spot and go. So the control should really focus on depleting that seed bank, making sure that, any seeds that had been dropped and are germinating have been removed before they can release new seeds. And this really works in our favor because a lot of invasive aquatic plants grow from fragments, and they have different ways of reproducing where it's not sexual reproduction. So they're really dependent on these clones that are breaking off. It's a turion, or if it's an offset, or if it's just, in the case of milfoil, just breaking apart and the stem floating downstream. So year after year, the one thing we need to do, again, is just make sure that we're controlling year after year to make sure that we're getting all the new seeds that have germinated so that they just disappear over time. And so really, like, understanding the growth and the habits of these plants is vital to the success of a program. And so Rob and I spend a lot of time looking and learning and, just learning about these plants and how they grow, and using their own, growth against them in a way that we can find the best tool in the tool belt to deal with them. So as mentioned before, transportation and disposal, Rob and I have gone over it. So you want to contain the plants and plant fragments as you're going over water and land. So you can see with our water treatment program now what we do. We have bins that we will collect and put the plants in for any overland or overwater transport. For disposal, as mentioned, for water chestnut or water soldier, it's the same as for water chestnut. You want to have them greater than 30 meters away from shore, where they won't enter the same waterway or another waterway, and let them dry out in sunshine if you can. This isn't water chestnut, but to give you an idea with another invasive aquatic is We laid them out on tarps on an open area with lots of sun so that they're able to dry out. And then alternatively, you could decompose them in a black garbage bag would be another option, or having, if there's a disposal site that you have where there's no concerns about them being re-released. And similar, there's best practices for controlling water chestnut, which basically reiterates what we talked about, but this is what is listed in the prevention and response plans. So we want to prevent that seed production. I'm sure you've heard that ad nauseum at this point. And the seeds start to drop in mid-August. So the majority of our control is done kind of mid-July until mid-August. Some of the work, the plants start to pop up in mid-June, early or late June, kind of. This is a good time to pull water chestnut as well before the roots gets established. So if it's just at the beginning, the seed is just holding that one little rosette at the surface, just holding it in the sediments. If you're able to remove it at that time, it's really effective. But typically, we usually wait until mid-July to start doing our removal. And part of that is because once the roots start to get established, the stem is too thin and you start breaking them off. But if you wait a little bit longer, mid-July, you're able to pull them and those stems are strong enough that you can pull the roots right out. One other thing to consider with that too, if you're, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit coming up, but with respect to in-time work windows, we have to work around fish spawning habitat, things like that. So you have to work within those windows. So really after July 15 in most of the waterways where these are found is when we can start working under the prevention and response plan. If you wanted to pull those plants before July 15, you're going to have to contact the MNRF to get a permit to do so. So just keep that in mind as well. So any work that you're doing after July 15 that meets the prevention and response plans, you should be all set, but and we'll go over this as well. So start early, maintain your effort. So you want to just continue going back and forth, back every year and within the year to make sure you get anything that's new. You want to prevent that spread during the control. So making sure that you're not dislodging them and sending them downstream to start a new colony. And you're going to clean, drain, dry your boat and your equipment. You're going to dispose of it carefully. And again, just being aware of the seeds, they can be very sharp and it's suggested to wear gloves. I know I've on more than one occasion had been picking parts of seeds out of my hands and they are very pointy. So with that all said, and I kind of touched on, other considerations such as the in-water timing window. So we've gone through the control techniques. We've kind of talked about these two species. And we're just about ready to hit the water. But before we do, there's just a few other considerations when controlling these plants and really, like when it's outside of the prevention and response plans. So there may be permits and approvals along with the prevention and response plans that are needed or maybe required from the MNRF or from other agencies or other levels of government before the activity can be initiated. So it's really the responsibility of the individual or the entity to ensure that they got all their permissions, approvals, authorizations, and things like that prior to doing any of the work. And this includes removal in provincial, crown land, and shorelands. So within Ontario, the beds of most of our waterways are considered provincial crown land. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, manages crown and shorelands under the Public Lands Act. So under the Public Lands Act, under Section 9, there's certain conditions that you have to meet. If you can't meet those conditions, you need to get a work permit from the MNRF in order to do the work. So an example, say you want to pull water chestnut in that timing window, earlier than July 15 during, potential fish spawning time, you would need to have that work permit. So the Public Lands Act doesn't apply to federal waterways. And I'm assuming if, we have some people here that have issues with water soldier, you're likely on the Trent Severn Waterway, or water chestnut, you may be on the Rideau Canal. And you may already know this already, but you need to get permit, an in-water and shoreline works permit, or a research and collection permit from Parks Canada, since these are federal waterways administered by Parks Canada. There may be other federal waterways as well that you're doing the work in. And in that case, you know, it is possible to reach out. I've got some contact information to get some more information of who to contact. Lastly, with herbicides and if you do plan to use herbicides to control water soldier, approval is required from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, as Rob had mentioned earlier. And information on requirements for aquatic herbicides applications can be obtained by contacting the MECP regional office in your area. Just a few other considerations in case you need some additional information. And I noticed Joanne had put this up in the chat box. Some extra links that we have, and all of these links as well are available through the prevention and response plan and on the ontario.ca website. So just, you know, for all of this information and where to find the prevention and response plans, this ontario.ca page, remove invasive aquatic plants, is probably your first go-to to get this information. You know, and it kind of lays everything out, not just for water chestnut and water soldier, but other invasive plants as well that we have in our waterway, and just the steps, you know, to control these plants. And working, as mentioned before, working within the in-water work timing window. And these are guidelines to restrict in-water work at certain times so that we're not affecting our, you know, fish spawning migration or, you know, critical life stages, things like that. And then lastly, anything that's not captured in the scope of the plans, by all means, you can contact the biodiversity and invasive species section of the MNRF directly at invasive.species@ontario.ca, and they'll be able to hopefully walk you through some of the nuance of regulation. I know it's always an exciting one. Rob and I have dealt with it for years, and we still don't fully understand it, and I don't think we fully will. But they're a very helpful crew, and will help you kind of get everything aligned before you get started. And the Natural Heritage Information Center number there, 1-800-667-1940 is another one as well. Lastly, so we did talk about reporting actually we didn't at all, but so within the prevention and response plans, one of the conditions is that you contact that invasive.species@ontario.ca email to let them know of any work that you're doing. But we also have these other provincial tools if you happen to come across other invasive species. You can and this is so the OFAH, through their invading species awareness program, handles the invading species hotline. They're always waiting and willing to answer the phone and answer anything about aquatic plants or, you know, Phragmites or any invasive plant or animal, you know, algae, whatever you want to give them a call about, and it'll be fun. So you can report species there. You can ask questions. You can also report any invasive species on edmaps.org/Ontario. EDMAPS is Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System, and it's part of there's an Ontario website, but it's actually part of a big database across North America, where most of the United States and a few Canadian provinces are connected. And really, it allows you to report invasive species. If you see something weird or something new, you can report them here, upload some photos, make sure it's not a grainy Sasquatch photo so that they can verify what it is. And it's sent to experts like Rob and others in the group. If it's a species of concern, like say hydrilla or, you know, water chestnut or water soldier, and it's found in a new place, there's through these contacts, it'll actually notify the right people within the provincial and federal government so that we can get response to deal with new outbreaks of these plants and other invasive species. So by all means, you know, use these tools at your leisure. And lastly, I just want to give a plug for one of our other partners, the Invasive Species Center. And so they're currently expanding their early detection and rapid response network. So this network has been in play in a few different regions across Ontario. And really what it is it's a community action network that's aimed at training people on how to identify, report, and manage invasive species in Ontario. It may look a little bit different this year, the last couple of years with COVID in terms of in-person events, but I've been involved in a few different seminars and webinars and some pull events and things like that. They try to do community engaged work, and since these two plants are found in the Kingston region, feel free to reach out to this and get more information about what they're doing and get engaged. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the webinar so far. And we're going to have an opportunity here to answer any questions that you have. Here's a great picture. This is the last time Rob and I think we were last in the field. And this was in 2019 in the fall. We were doing, after we'd completed all of our control work and all of our surveillance that we had to do, we went to areas that were kind of potential locations where these species could be found. And so we did some extended surveillance to see if we could detect new populations of water chestnut and water soldier in kind of the shared waterways that we work. And luckily we weren't able to find anything, but it was a nice day out on the water. So with that, I'll leave you with the question slide here. And if you want to populate our chat, we'll what we'll do is we'll just go through and answer the questions as we're moving through. Mark had asked, is mechanical harvesting a viable option for water soldier? This was a little bit earlier on. So Rob, do you want to handle, and a follow-up, are herbicides effective and how do they affect our native environment?
Right.
But,
hi, Mark, how are you? Long time no see. Mark, you did the mechanical harvesting for water soldier back in 2016 or 15, I believe it was. In my opinion, it's not the best method to remove water soldier. Mechanical harvesters have their place in the species that they're good at removing, but because of where water soldier predominantly inhabits, it's those back bays with that are hard to get into with a lot of woody debris. You the one who worked on it, so you know it's kind of difficult to get into those areas. If we had water soldier in open water, a mechanical harvester would be amazing. It would just scoop it up and we'd be on our way. But that wasn't the case when we held that pilot control project. We saw a lot of time maneuvering around obstacles in the water, and that's just because where water soldier likes to grow. Are herbicides effective? We've seen great success with herbicide, up to 80% reduction in areas. We had 177 hectares of water soldier on Lake Seymour. And after the 2020 monitoring, we're down to 13.6 hectares of water soldier. That's a massive reduction and a great accomplishment. We're very, very proud of that. And how do they affect the natural environment? Well, in terms of the timing, when we do the herbicide treatment, we do it in the fall. So this is there's a few reasons why we do it in the fall. A lot of the cottagers have gone home. A lot of our native plants have already gone dormant and died back. So, and water soldier is an evergreen, and it continues growing throughout the fall, well into the early winter. So it's still actively photosynthesizing, and this is a good time to use herbicide on it. So we're not really affecting our native species.
Great, thanks so much, Rob. So another question here from Mark. Is it possible to volunteer for a day or so to learn how to remove these species safely and properly? This is a really great idea, Mark. It's something that I know Rob and I would both like, to do in terms of, this stuff. It's hard to say what it looks like with COVID and funding at this point, but definitely it's absolutely something that would help people for the most part. We've been the only ones that are doing this because we're the ones that hold the authorization. So we want to pass on this knowledge to everybody else, because the more people we can get out there, and really, like, the best way to learn about the stuff is by doing it, not by listening to us for an hour and a half talk at you. So
right. And if I could speak to that, every year the Water Soldier program holds a volunteer day. Obviously, it didn't happen last year. But this is an opportunity for the volunteers to come out, help us monitor, help us remove. And when we know what the future looks like and things get back to what will be normal, Mark, you have my contact information. If not, I think that Joanne put it in the chat feed there. You can contact me and we can set something up. I would be more than willing to accommodate that.
So we're a little light on questions here. Here's a question for Rob. If Eurasian water milfoil, water chestnut, and water soldier were to be introduced to a pond at the same time, which one do you think would come out as the winner?
Long-term or short-term?
Let's do short term.
Short-term, I believe water soldier would be the winner.
Okay.
In terms of the longer term with European water chestnut having that seed bank, that would be problematic
Ooh.
for water soldier survival, I think.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Yeah. So we got another question and another one for Rob. I think most people are likely more interested in water soldier at this point. But will you be continuing annual monitoring in Lake Seymour?
As far as I know, we're going to be out on the water doing our yearly monitoring for water soldier in the Trent Severn waterway.
Great.
We will be going back, and we're looking forward to seeing less than the 13.6 hectares that was left from the 171 this in 2021. So we're looking to get that down to 0.
Okay, great. So we did have a question. So we did mention off the beginning that this webinar is going to be posted afterwards. So we're recording and we're going to be posting online. And so Joanne, I'm wondering if you can help me with where this will be posted. It's likely going to be up on our, we'll be sharing on our social media, but there likely will be a link that's added to the webpage, I believe, that we have for this. And hopefully she can provide some insight on that. Yep, so we'll be posting it at the ducks.ca location and as well as on our social media. So if you have anybody who wants, to watch this, or if you just want to watch it again a few times, you're more than welcome to, because we'll give you the link.
We have a question for you, Kyle.
What's that? Sorry.
There's a question here for you from David.
Okay, great.
I'll read it to you.
Okay.
I have missed this, Kyle, so I guess he may have tuned in late. What's the status of water chestnut around Wolf Island and other areas of past presence?
Sure. So I didn't talk about what we have with, actual kind of numbers with Wolf Island and our other property or locations where we know. So as mentioned, there's just a handful of places that it's found. And through that control, like we had been controlling for 6 years in the Wolf Island area. And we had seen at Wolf Island and the Kingston area, around Wolf Island, there's 4 bays where it's located. One bay, it was completely eradicated after 1 year. There were only a couple plants that had shown up. And we continue to go back and didn't see any others. After 6 years of treatment, we saw an 86% decline in the population around Wolf Island. And so really what happens is we're still kind of covering the same area, but instead of having these dense, thick mats of plants, we have these scattered plants here and there. So it's kind of like just doing a little bit of pickup to get those remaining plants to make sure, because that plant could have 150 seeds. And then that 3 years later, you have that big population again. So, so we do return every year for in that respect. The population, I had shown a picture for the Black Rapids with, when we first started dealing with the population, how much plant was there. It's kind of the same thing. We're seeing all these smaller populations as we're going. And really, like, for the most part, everything's fairly contained. And so, we're lucky in the sense that, working with aquatic plants and aquatic plant management for over 10 years, working with a species where there's hope because you can actually, effectively get ahead of it just by being persistent is great. And, and so for both programs, we've done a lot to really reduce what's there. With that, perhaps we can end a little bit early. But, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Rob or myself. Let me just switch screens here. If you need to get a hold of either myself or Rob, feel free to reach us at our email addresses there. As well, Joanne had provided in the chat those other links to check out. Highly suggest that. It's we love talking about these plants. So, if you want to give us a call, we'll talk your ear off. So
yeah, reach out, willing to talk to anybody and answer any questions you have.
Great. We are at the end of the program. We've learned a lot about invasive European water chestnut and invasive water soldier this morning. And we thank you again for all your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay.